Masechet Avoda Zara, Daf Mem, and we plan to finish the second perek with this daf. The Mishnah mentioned v'tarit she'ena terufa, a tarit fish that's not minced, that you could tell what it is, and it's a kosher fish. If it's minced, then we're afraid that the non-Jew mixed it up with non-kosher fish, but if you can see it, then it's okay. The Baraita said, what does that mean, ena terufa, that it's not minced? For sure, if it's whole, then for sure it's good. You can see it and check it out. But the Baraita said, even if it's not whole, as long as you can see Rosh v'shidra nikar, the head and the spine are recognizable, that's sufficient. You could recognize the head. Oh, that's a tarit fish head. And then you'll know that it is kosher. So the Gemara is going to start off discussing that Baraita. Itemar. Rav Huna amar achet rosh v'shidra nikar. Rav Nachman amar o rosh o shidra. Rav Huna is stringent, and he says that you cannot eat this fish unless you can see the head and the spine in order to identify it as a kosher tarit fish. Rav Nachman is more lenient, and he says what the Baraita means is either the head or the spine. Either of them by themselves are a sign that's recognizable of what kind of fish it is. Mativ Rav Ukba bar Chama. Rav Ukba bar Chama has a Mishnah from Masechet Chulin to challenge both of these opinions. Because the Mishnah teaches, Ubedagim, kol sheyesh lo senapir v'kaskeset. The signs of a kosher fish are fins and scales. So that's what you need to see, fins and scales, not a head and spine. Why are you talking about a head and a spine, a head or a spine? None of those are important. It's the fins and scales that make it kosher. Amar Abaye, ki tanyahi be'ara'a ufal muda dedamur shayhu litmeim. Abaye explains that the Mishnah in Masechet Chulin, that's dealing with these fish called ara'a and falmuda fish, where the heads look the same as a non-kosher fish. So even if you had the head of such a fish, you'd not be able to tell if it's kosher or not kosher. Therefore, for those type of fish, you need to see the fins and scales. In fact, for any fish, if you have fins and scales, then you can identify them and it's kosher, including the tarit fish. What we said before here is that there is an added leniency for tarit fish or any other fish where it has a distinctive head and distinctive spine. Then, even if you don't have the fins and scales, let's say they were filleted and taken off, but you can see the head and the spine, and the spine, or the spine, those are identifiable in a fish like a tarit. So surely, if you have fins and scales, that's always good, and that'll be good even for a fish that is not identifiable by its head, but other fish that are identifiable by its head, you can also make it kosher. Know that it's kosher from that. Amar Rav Yehuda mishmei de'ula machloket letabel besiran aval begufan dibra kol asur ad sheyeh rosh v'shidra nikar. Rav Yehuda in the name of Ula says that this machloket between Rav Huna and Rav Nachman about whether you need the head and the spine or the head or the spine, that's only regarding whether you can dip food in brine made out of these fish. But to eat a fish itself, not in brine, but the actual fish, the head and the leftovers, whatever is attached to it, that everybody agrees is prohibited unless you have both the head and the spine. So in other words, if you have the head and the spine, then you can eat that fish because you can identify it as a tarit fish. If you have only one or the other, that's where the machloket is. Rav Huna says you need both of them in order to even have the brine. Rav Nachman says if you have one or the other, then you can have the brine. Why are we lenient regarding brine as opposed to the body of the fish? Well, because the body of the fish, that would be an isur deoraita. So as for isur deoraita, we have to be 100% sure. So there you need the head and the spine to identify it. But when it's mixed into brine, then it's already what we're afraid of, that it might be some non-kosher fish mixed into a majority of kosher fish. So there, it's a mixture, which is already batel deoraita. It's only a derabanan problem, so we can be lenient if you, according to Rav Nachman, if you can recognize the head or the spine, you can be lenient in a mixture of brine, but even he would agree that we have to be stringent to eat the fish itself. Amar Rabbi Zera, Mereshava metabelna besiran. Rabbi Zera says, I used to dip into brine that was made from fish that was identifiable only the head or only the spine. כיוון דשמענה להד אמר רב יהודה משמי דעולה, מחלוקת לטבל בסירן, אבל בגופן דיברה כל אסור, עד שיהיה ראש ושדרה ניכר, בסירן נמה, לא מטבלנה. However, now that I heard this law that Chidush Rav Yehuda in the name of Ula just said, that the machloket between Rav Huna and Rav Nachman is only regarding the brine, but the body of the fish itself, everybody would agree, is prohibited unless you can identify both the head and the spine. When I heard that, I decided to be more stringent even regarding the brine itself. In other words, I don't want to put myself into even a doubt. You're telling me that the body of the fish itself, everybody agrees is prohibited. If you can only identify the head, you know what? I don't want to have even the brine. So when he heard that, he was stringent. Amar Rav Papa, Hilchetan sheherosh v'shidra nikar shel kol achat ve'achat. Rav Papa says, we rule the halacha like the stringent opinion. Not only that, there's another stringency that if you have a lot of fish, all mixed up, every single fish you have to recognize both the head and the spine. Even though there's a big tub of lots of fish, you can't assume that they're all the same. You have to pick out each one and say, I recognize the head and the spine in order for it to be kosher. We have a beraita that challenges Rav Papa. The beraita says that if you have pieces of fish and there is a sign on some of them, whether the sign that you can see it's kosher is on all the fish or only a few of the fish or even 1 out of 100, all of them are permitted because they're all together in some in a jug. You can assume that one is identifiable, that's a kosher one. You can assume that all the rest of them are the same type of fish. They just got mixed up and cut up into pieces. But as long as one is identifiable, all are identifiable. That's against, all are kosher. It goes against Rav Papa, who said that you have to identify each and every fish. ומעשה בגוי אחד שבי גרב של חתיכות ונמסר סימן באחת מהן והתיר רבן שמעון בן גמליאל את הגרב כולו. The Braita goes on and says that this is a halacha למעשה. And one time there was a non-Jew who brought a big jug of fish pieces, and there was on one of the fish only a sign of kashrut, and he brought it to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and he says the entire jug is permitted. So challenge against Rav Papa. Tirgema Rav Papa kishe chatichot shavot. Rav Papa says, that baraita is talking about only in a case where the pieces match up. You could take all these pieces of a fish like a jigsaw puzzle, and you could put this tail next to this body, and this piece over here, stick it in, and you put it all together, and you can make one whole fish. And you do that for all the pieces. So you can put them all together, and then when you put it together, you can see that this bottom matched this top, and then you can identify the kosher symbols that way, since this half is kosher, so the other half that fits in is also kosher. That's the only case where you can assume that all the pieces are kosher, only if you can put them back together. We ask about Rav Papa, if that's the case I was talking about, isn't that obvious? If you can put all the pieces back together and they make a whole kosher fish, isn't that obvious that would be kosher? No, it's teaching us that you might think that maybe they happen to fit together. Maybe it just so happens that this half of a non-kosher fish matches up exactly with the other half of a kosher fish, and it just happens to fit together, but really it's not kosher. So that's what the Baraita is teaching us according to Rav Papa. They don't have to worry about that. If it fits together, you can assume it's all from the kosher fish. Hahu arba de sahanta. A story about a ship that was carrying this little fish, and it came to the city of Sichra, a city on the west bank of the Tigris River. And Rav Huna bar Chinina went out and he saw that there were scales. So he said, they must be kosher. Rava said, no, you can't assume it's kosher when it's coming from a place that has lots of kosher fish. You can't assume that all the fish are kosher. In other words, you didn't examine each and every fish to see, does this one have scales on it? Does this one have scales on it? You just looked and said, there's a bunch of scales here. But maybe it came from a place where there were a lot of kosher fish, and so the scales on the boat are from some kosher fish that had been on the boat. But doesn't mean that all the fish that are currently on the boat are kosher. So Rava said, you cannot assume that they're not kosher. And the shofar was blown from Rava, meaning a herald. Someone would come and make an announcement and would blow the shofar. Hey, everybody listen. And Rava ruled that all these little fish on this boat are prohibited. And at the same time, a shofar from Rav Huna bar Chinena blew and announced that they are permitted. So now there were two contradictory rulings about the little fish on this boat. Amar Rav Yirmiyah midifti lididi amar li Rav Papi kishera Rav Huna bar Chinena besiran ava begufan la. And now a discussion on exactly what were they arguing about. Rav Yirmiyah midifti said that Rav Papi, this is Rav Papi with a yod, told him that when Rav Huna bar Chinena said that the fish on this boat are kosher because there are scales all around, that was only referring to the brine that is made from these fish. But the fish themselves, no, because you're not sure. We didn't look at each fish to see if it has scales on it. There's only an assumption that there's scales on the boat, so they probably are. So you could be lenient regarding brine made with it, but not for the fish themselves. Amar Rav Asher lididi amar li Rav Papa kishera Rav Huna bar Chinena afilu begufan. However, Rav Asher disagrees, and he says, I have a report from Rav Papa with an aleph. Rav Papi and Rav Papa are two different Amoraim. They both lived at the same time, so they can be confusing. But Rav Papa reported that when Rav Huna bar Chinena said that the fish on this boat were permitted, he was permitting them even to eat the bodies of the fish themselves. And Rav Huna continues and says, V'ana la mesar asarna deka amar li Rav Papa. So me, myself, what did I decide to do? I didn't make them prohibited because Rav Papa told me that Rav Huna bar Chinena permitted them totally even to eat the bodies. So I'm not going to say it's totally prohibited. V'la mishra sharena deha amar li Rav Yehuda. משמי דעולה מחלוקת לטבל בסירן, אבל בגופן לדברי הכל, עד שיהיה ראש ושדרה ניכר של כל אחד ואחד. On the other hand, I'm not going to permit it totally because Rav Yehuda, in the name of Ula, which we saw above, said that the machloket over there above was about whether you need the head and the spine, or the head or the spine, that machloket was only regarding dipping something in the brine. But the fish themselves, you cannot assume are kosher unless you have the head and the spine of every single one. So you see that Ula over there was stringent, and you have to examine each and every one. And so we should apply that over here and look at the scales of each and every one. And so, on the one hand, I have Rav Papa quoting Rav Huna bar Chinena saying to be totally lenient, and on the other hand, we said over there that even the lenient opinion over there was only for the brine, but for the body itself, everybody said it's prohibited. And so therefore, I didn't totally permit nor totally prohibit. So it sounds like Rav Asher is saying, in this case, I wouldn't allow the body of them, but the brine I would permit. Yatev Rav Chinena bar Idi kamed Rav Ada bar Ahava vitev veka'amar. One time Rav Chinena bar Idi was sitting in front of Rav Ada bar Ahava. So Rav Chinena is a student. He's sitting before his master. Vitev veka'amar. And the teacher was sitting and he taught the following law. Goy shevi areva mila achaviyot v'nimset kilbit ba'achat mehen petuchot kulan mutarot situmot hi muteret v'chulan asurot. If a non-Jew brings a boat full of barrels of brine, and in only one of the barrels is there a kilbit fish. So for sure in that barrel that has the kilbit fish, that one's kosher, because that's the indicator that even the non-Jewish brine makers, if they made it out of only kosher fish, that brine, they'd put a kilbit fish as a sign that this one is kosher. So here's the problem. We only found the kilbit fish in one of them. So what do? It depends. If the barrels are all open, then all of them are permitted. Because we'll assume that there was a kilbit fish in each and every one of them, but because they're open and it was rocking on the sea, so the kilbit fish fell out. But the fact that there's a kilbit fish in one of them means that probably all of them are kosher. But if they're closed, if they're sealed, then only the barrel with the kilbit fish is kosher because it has one. The other ones, you can't say it fell out, so the other ones you have to assume are not kosher. Amar leminah lacha telata keraesh shemi'ali merav ushmuel v'Rabbi Yochanan. The student of Chidna says, what's your source for that? And the teacher Avoda says, I have 3 Pesukim that I heard it from Rav, Shemuel, and Rabbi Yochanan. Obviously, these are not Pesukim, these are great sages. But the point of this, it's a wonderful phrase. It means that the authority of Rav, Shemuel, and Rabbi Yochanan are so great that they are proof texts themselves, as if there was a pasuk to say so. Amar Rav Beruna Amar Rav Kirbe dagim ve'obaran en nikachin elamin hamumche. Rav says that the intestines, that's kirbeh dagim, and ubaran is the roe, that's the eggs of a fish. One may not buy them unless you get it from an expert, because it's really hard to tell. If you have a whole fish, you can look, fins and scales or head, and you can tell if it's a kosher fish or not. But the intestines and the eggs of the fish, that's very hard to tell. The difference between a kosher one and a non-kosher one. Even until today, unless it's certain fish that are more easily identifiable, like salmon, other ones are all very easy to mix up. So you need a real expert to tell you this one's kosher from a kosher fish and that one's not. Rami le'olad l'Rabbi dostai demin biri medekam harav kirbeh dagim ubaran en nakichen ela min hamumche. Mekelal de dag tameh it le'ubar, urminhi dag tameh mashritz, dag tahor metil besim. And now we have a contradiction against this statement of Rav from another statement of Rav. And so Ula brought up this contradiction to the Bidostai from Bidi. It says, from the fact that Rav said that the intestines and the eggs of a fish cannot be bought unless it's by an expert who can distinguish between kosher eggs and non-kosher eggs, we can derive that non-kosher fish have eggs. However, there's another braita that says that non-kosher fish do not lay eggs. Rather, non-kosher fish, mashritz, they just give birth. They just generate in a different way. They don't lay eggs, whereas kosher fish lay eggs. So according to this second baraita, it would seem like if there are eggs, then they're definitely from a kosher fish, because only kosher fish lay eggs. Non-kosher fish don't have eggs. What were they talking about? It could be that they were thinking of mammals, like whales and dolphins that give birth to live offspring, or whatever they were imagining. But this baraita assumes that all eggs must be kosher because only kosher fish have eggs. So what should we do? How do we resolve this? And the answer to be Dostai, mean Biri, who was asked the question, he says, Seme mikan ubaran. You know what? Delete the word ubaran from Rav's ruling. He says, no, it's only talking about the intestines that you have to buy from an expert who can tell the difference. But you're right, eggs you don't have to buy from an expert because only kosher fish have eggs, therefore all fish eggs are kosher. Amar le Rabbi Zara, la tisme tarvayu metile besim ninhu, ela ze mashris mebachutz v'ze mashris mebifnim. Rabbi Zara, however, says no, do not delete the word eggs. Leave that in there, because in fact both kosher and non-kosher fish do have eggs, and the only difference is that kosher fish, they hatch their eggs outside, they lay their eggs and then they hatch afterwards, whereas the non-kosher fish, they hatch them inside. But they also have eggs, and therefore, if you have a fish and you open it up, there are eggs there. Both kosher and non-kosher fish, you will find fish eggs, and so therefore, leave those words in. In fact, you need an expert also, not only for intestines, but also for fish eggs. Lama li mumche livdok b'simanin. And now we ask, why do you need an expert? Why can't you check the signs that it is kosher? Detanya kisimane besim kach simane dagim. There's a braita that says the signs of bird eggs are the same signs as a fish. How do you tell if a bird egg is kosher or not? Use the same signs as a fish. We ask about that. Simane dagim salkadatech, simane dagim senapir vekaskeset ketiv behu. What are you telling me to check the fish signs? Fish signs are scales and fins. So fins and scales, that only applies to fish. You're not going to have fins on scales on any bird eggs. That doesn't make any sense. Ela kesimane besim kach simane ubare dagim. No, what this baraita means to say is that the signs for a kosher bird egg are the same signs as fish eggs. Both of their eggs have the same sign. So yeah, if you just find an egg that's a bird egg and you don't know where does it come from a chicken, from an ostrich, so there are signs to tell. Use the same signs for fish eggs, and so you can tell by yourself, so you don't need an expert. Now, what are those signs? Velo and simane besim, these are the signs for a bird egg for it to be kosher. Kol shekodedet ve'agolgelet, rosha echad kad ve'rosha echad chad tehora, shene rashi achadin u'shne rashi akadin temea, chelmon mibachos ve'chelmon mibifnim temea, chelmon mibachos ve'chelmon mibifnim tahor, chelmon וחלמון, חלבון וחלמון מעורבים זה בזה, זוהי besat השרץ. So any egg that's narrow on top and it's rounded, and one of its ends is wide and the other one is pointed, is kosher. Kind of like a chicken egg. It's rounded on top and bottom, but not equally rounded. One side is wider and one side is narrower. That means it's kosher. If both ends are sharp or both are wide, then that's not kosher. And the yolk, if the yolk is on the outside and the albumin is on the inside, that's not kosher. If the albumin, the white, is on the outside and the yolk is on the inside, like chicken eggs, then that is kosher. If the white and the yellow are mixed together, then that's a sheretz, that's from a lizard or something. All these do have some basis in reality. In fact, reptile eggs seem to have very little albumin, and therefore if you open it up, there's some that's a little whitish, a little yellowish mixed together, and therefore it looks like it's all mixed together. And so yes, you can tell from the shape and also from the white and yellows inside if it's kosher or not kosher. So just to look at the same thing with the fish egg, and you can see if it's the shape or that shape. Amar Rava kisheni mochu. Rava says, oh, you're right. If they're whole, you could tell that way. But if the eggs are smashed or melted, then you won't be able to tell from the shape. That's when you need an expert to tell you what kind of fish it came from. And now back to that Rabbi Dostai from Biri, who said that we should erase the word eggs from the halacha of Rav because he agreed with the proposal that non-kosher fish don't have eggs. And so you don't need an expert because all fish eggs are kosher because only kosher fish have eggs. How will he understand the braita that we just cited that says the same signs for bird eggs are also true for fish eggs, meaning that some fish eggs are kosher and some fish eggs are not kosher? So how can he understand this braita? And the answer is lav teruse metarasla kach simane kirbe dagim. The answer is, didn't you yourself have to fix the language of the baraita? Because the original language of the baraita just said simane besim is like dagim, that the signs of kosher bird eggs are the same signs as birds. And we said that can't be right. So we added in, and that's talking about ubare dagim, that eggs of fish. So since you're adding this word ubare anyway, so don't add that word. Add instead of ubare, kirbe, fish intestines. And so this baraita is telling you that fish intestines, if you want to know if those from a kosher fish or not, compare them to the signs for bird eggs. But in fact, if it's eggs from a fish, then for sure it's kosher because only kosher fish have eggs according to that opinion. And where can you apply these signs of the intestines of a fish to see if it's wide or pointed? What are you talking about? Oh, in fact, there is a bladder of the fish that has a shape, and you can see is it shaped like an egg, kosher egg, or like a non-kosher egg, and you can tell from that whether it's a kosher fish or not. Now, what if there's no expert there, and you have these fish insides, and you want to know what to do. Amar Rav Yehuda, Kevanda Amar Ani Melachtim Mutarin. Rav Yehuda says, if the person selling you the fish, or someone says, I salted that fish. In other words, I'm the one that removed these eggs and these insides from the fish, and I salted the fish, and I already sold them, I already ate them, whatever, but I was there, and I can testify that these eggs are from a fish that was kosher. Then that's enough, that's permitted. Rav Nachman Amar, Ad Shiomar Elu Dagim ve'elu Kirbehen. Rav Nachman says that's not good enough. You need a person to be able to say, point to the fish next to it and say, these insides came from these fish. The fish actually have to be there, and then only then the person is believed to say, yes, I know, I saw that these eggs came from that fish, and then you can trust them that it really came from there. But if the fish bodies are gone, then you can't trust them. Ori le Rav Yehuda le'ada dayala, kevanda amar ani melachtim mutarim. Rav Yehuda instructed Ada, his attendant, and says, if a seller says, I salted them, that's enough. That he saw that these eggs came from a kosher fish, even though the fish isn't around. That's sufficient to believe him that they're kosher. Next, in part of the Mishnah, ve'aleh shel chiltit pishita. Previous Mishnah said that diced chiltit is no good because it's a very sharp herb, and the grease on the non-kosher knife, if a non-Jew cuts it, will enter into the taste of the plant. But if you have a whole leaf, then it's permitted, because the whole leaf, that just grew. You just pulled it out of the ground, and you didn't cut it, so that's kosher. We ask, isn't that obvious? A leaf that grows? But you didn't even need to ask if it's kosher or not. La nisracha ela likratin shebo, ma'udetem anechush dilma maite ume'arebe. Kamashmalan teha ish tarukehi te ish taruk ve'ata behadeh. No, we're talking about a case where there are slivers of chiltit on the leaf, little pieces. And you might say, what are these little pieces doing here? Maybe a non-Jew sliced some chiltit together with this whole leaf and mixed it in. And so now there's non-kosher slivers together with this leaf, and so you could say the whole thing is not good. The Mishnah therefore teaches us that's not true. Naturally, there are sometimes little pieces of chiltit that fall onto the leaf, and even when you pull it out of the ground, there's also little pieces on the leaf, and therefore you can assume it's naturally there and not from a knife of a non-Jew. Next Mishnah said rolled olive cakes. They would take olives and smash them together and make a cake out of it, and it was nice and soft. And this is permitted. Peshita, isn't that obvious? It's just olives. What are you worried about? La nisracha fagav de rafe tuba. We're talking about a case where it's very soft. Mahu detema chamerarema behu kamashmalan hanemechamat mishcha hu dirfu. You might think that, how did it get so soft? Maybe the non-Jew added wine to it, which would be yayin nesech. And the Mishnah comes to teach us that no. The reason why it's so soft is because of the oil that's coming out of the olives. That's making it soft, even without wine. You don't have to worry about the wine added. Rabbi Yosef says that if it's very ripe, very, very soft, it's prohibited, because then you do assume that they added wine. What does that mean, shalachin, that it's overripe? Amar Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, kol she'ochazo biyado v'gad'inato nishmetet. It's so soft that if you pick up one olive with your hand, the pit just slips out. You don't even have to open it up or bite half of it out or push it out. It just slips out. Then that's very soft, and that indicates that they probably added wine to make it so soft. Hachagavin haba'in vechule. The Mishnah says that locusts that comes from a salesman's bucket or basket are prohibited, but those that are in his storeroom are okay. We're talking about kosher locusts, the species of grasshoppers that we know are kosher, but the ones in his basket, he adds wine to it to make them look nicer. But he doesn't add the wine in the storeroom, as we learn in the Baraita, Tenor Banan. Ha-chagavin, ve-ha-kafrisin, ve-ha-kaflotot, ha-ba'in min ha-osar min ha-heftek, min ha-sefina mutarin, הנמכרים בכת לוזה לפני כן ואני אסוrin, מפני שמזלף yayin עליהן. Locusts, caper buds, and leeks, If they come from the storehouse or the storeroom or the ship, those are permitted. Because all these things, we're talking about that they're dried out or salted so that they'll stay a long time. And you wouldn't add wine to it, because if you add wine to it, it doesn't last a long time. So if it's from the storeroom or the ship, then you can be sure that no wine was added. But if they're being sold on the market or in front of the storekeeper, then that's prohibited because he's about to sell them. So he doesn't need it to last a long time, and they would tend to sprinkle wine on all these things to make it look nice and fatter and healthier, and that wine makes it prohibited. וכן יין תפוחים של גויים הבאים מן האוצר מן ההפתק ומן הסלולה מותרים הנמכר בקטלוזה אסור מפני שמערבין בו יין. And the same law is true for apple wine, meaning apple cider, that is sold by non-Jews. If it comes from the storehouse or the storeroom or the basket of the salesman, that's permitted because those are storage places, and you're not going to add wine to it because the wine is not going to last long with the wine in it. But if it's already on the market about to be sold, then they do add some wine into it because the wine, it could be cheaper than it, so they can dilute it with it and it makes it a little tastier. And now it's not going to be so fresh, it's not going to last a long time, but if they're going to drink it right now, then it tastes better. So they would add wine right before it was sold. So you can't buy it in the marketplace, but you can buy it from the storage room directly. Tenor Rabbanan. פעם אחת חש רבי במאב, אמר, כלום יש אדם שיודע, יין תפוחים של גויים אסור או מותר. One time, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he had a stomach ache, and he knew that apple cider would alleviate it. And so he asked, does anybody know if apple cider from non-Jews is prohibited or permitted? He wants to get some, but he couldn't find any Jewishly made apple cider. He wants to get it from non-Jews so that he can remedy his disease. Amar lefanav Rabbi Ishmael ben Rabbi Yosef, פעם אחת חש אבא במאב, והביאו לו יין תפוחים של גויים של 70 שנה, ושתה ונתרפא. אמר לו, כל כך היה בידך, ואתה מסערני. Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, says, I remember that one time my father, Rabbi Yosef, he also had a stomach ache, and they brought to him apple cider from a non-Jew that was aged for 70 years. And he drank it, and he felt better. And Rabbi says, this whole time you knew that, and you're letting me suffer? Why didn't you tell me this? Right? I'm so happy to hear that. That means obviously it's kosher. If Rabbi Yosef drank it, so I can drink it too. בדקו מצאו גוי אחד שהיה לו 300 גרבי יין של תפוחים של 70 שנה, ושתה ונתרפא. אמר ברוך המקום שמסר עולמו לשומרים. So they went and checked, and they found that there is in fact one goy who had 300 big jugs of apple cider that was aged for 70 years. And so he got some, and he drank it, and he felt better. He was permitted to drink it because obviously it was in the storeroom. If it would lasted for 70 years, he didn't add any wine to it. It wouldn't last that long if there was wine in it. So he's able to get it directly from the storeroom. Therefore it was kosher, and he got better. And he remarked afterwards, blessed is Hashem that gave his universe over to its keepers. In other words, we thank this goy for keeping this apple cider around for these 70 years so that I could benefit from it and heal it. So he's thankful to all the people in the world that do productive things. And even though this is a long process and takes a lot of work and responsibility, right, he's thankful that there are such people that do these good things in the world. V'chen litruma. Finally, the Mishnah says, that same law applies to terumah. What does that mean? Mai v'chen leterumah. What distinction are you saying applies also to terumah? Amar Rav Sheshet v'chen lekohen echashud limkor terumah l'shem holin lefanav huda asur aval haba min ha'osar umin ha'heftek umin ha'selula mutar. If you have a kohen who we suspect is selling terumah and not telling people it's terumah, telling people it's chulin. You see, terumah food is less expensive because there's less of a market for it. Only Kohanim can eat terumah, and only when they are tahor. So, if the Kohen has a lot of terumah, a lot of people gave him terumah, too much, more than he and his household can eat. So he can sell it to another Kohen, but he has to sell it very cheaply because it's a limited market. If he sells it and tells people it's regular food, then he can get a higher price, even though he's making people sin by doing that. So it's a terrible thing to do that. So if you have a Kohen who is not so trustworthy, and he has some food in front of him, and he says, this is chulin, do not trust him, do not buy it. But if he has it in a storehouse, or in a storeroom, or in a basket, a big basket, a salesman's basket, then it's permitted, because if it's in a basket or a storeroom, there's a lot of it, and he's not going to want to risk his reputation and lose it all. But if it's only a little bit of food in front of him, then what's the worst that can happen? As the Gemara explains, irtute mirtat sabar shama'i be'rabanan umafsedu le minai. He's afraid. If it's just a little bit in front of him, and the rabbis find out that he's selling this terumah as chulin, then they'll confiscate it. So if it's only a little bit in front of him, so they'll confiscate the plate that's in front of him. He's not losing so much. But if he has a whole storeroom full of terumah, and now he sells a little bit and sells it as chulin, and people hear about it, and the rabbis come and they take it all away from him, he'll lose a lot. So he's not going to want to risk a lot, and therefore the same distinction between a little bit that he's selling right now is prohibited rather, just like we said before, but that in the storeroom is permitted. So the same rule that applies to terumah is also one that applies to the apple cider and the grasshoppers, that in both of them, if they're for sale right over here, maybe add wine to it, it's no good, but if it's from the warehouse, then it's permitted. Hazran alach en ma'amidin, chazakim uberuchim.